All right, so today we're going to help you become a better negotiator. We're going deep on Deepak Malhotra. He's a Harvard Business School professor who's kind of a guru on getting to yes. And lucky for us, he did this really insightful interview with Inc. We're talking about boardrooms, conflict resolution, even healthcare.
Yeah, you know what really stood out to me was how he stressed the importance of strategy, even for those everyday negotiations. The kind we don't really overthink.
Oh, absolutely. Like, we wouldn't launch a product without a solid plan, right? So why do we just wing it when it comes to negotiating? Malhotra actually suggests inviting more people than you think you need to those strategy meetings.
I think the value there is really in having those diverse perspectives,
Hmm.
you know, challenging each other. And it's not about getting everyone to agree. It's more about uncovering the strongest arguments and anticipating any roadblocks.
So it's like brainstorming, but amped up. Honestly, I've been guilty of assuming I knew the best way forward, but that more minds are better idea is kind of brilliant.
Yeah, it can really shake things up. And speaking of shaking things up, let's talk BTNAA.
Okay, so for our listeners who might not be familiar, BATNA stands for Best Alternative to a Negotiated Agreement. It's basically your backup plan, right?
It is, but it's also more than that. Knowing your BATNA is key to setting your walkaway point. So let's say you're selling your car and someone offers you way less than you want. If you haven't really considered your BTNA, you might feel pressured to take the deal. But if you know you have another buyer lined up with a better offer, well, you can walk away with confidence.
I see what you mean. It's about knowing what you're worth and not settling for less.
Exactly. And here's where it gets even more interesting. Malhotra says once you understand your own BTNA, you should shift your focus to understanding the other side's BATNA.
Okay, why is that so important?
Because by understanding their BTNA, you can really tailor your negotiation to highlight the value you bring. You're showing them how you solve their problems or meet their needs in a way no one else can.
So instead of just saying, this is what I want, it's more like, here's how I can make your life easier, or here's how I can help your business grow.
Exactly. You're reframing the negotiation around their needs and showing them what they stand to lose if they don't reach an agreement with you.
That's a great point. I can see how shifting that perspective could really change the whole dynamic.
Oh, absolutely. It's a game changer. And while we're on the topic of strategy, Malhotra highlights another key element that often gets overlooked: process.
Yeah, I'm definitely guilty of just focusing on the deal itself and not really thinking enough about the process. What kind of traps can we avoid by paying more attention to process up front?
Well, imagine this. You've spent weeks working out the details of a huge contract. And then at the last minute, you find out there's another decision maker you didn't even know about.
Oh man, that would be a nightmare. Like hitting a brick wall when you thought you were about to cross the finish line.
Exactly. And that's precisely what can happen when you don't clarify the process early on. Who needs to be involved? What are the timelines for approvals? Are there any potential cultural differences we need to be aware of?
Oh, that reminds me of the story I read about a business owner in South Asia who insisted that all his Western clients take this grueling 3-hour drive from the airport to his manufacturing facility, even though it was only 11 miles away.
Wow.
Yeah, it was crazy. He said they wouldn't truly understand the realities of doing business there until they experienced that journey. He wanted them to see firsthand that delays and challenges were just part of the process.
So it wasn't just about the logistics. It was about setting expectations from the beginning.
Exactly. This is making me realize how even small details about process can have a big impact on the overall negotiation.
For sure. By being proactive and addressing these issues up front, you can avoid misunderstandings, build trust, and really increase your chances of getting to a successful outcome.
Right, absolutely. So we've talked about strategy and process. Now I'm curious about this idea of approaching negotiations with a learning mindset. It seems kind of counterintuitive. Shouldn't we be focused on getting our own points across?
It's easy to fall into that trap, thinking it's like a battle of wills and whoever's loudest or most persistent wins. But Malhotra suggests flipping the script. Instead of trying to dominate the conversation, go in with genuine curiosity and try to learn as much as you can about the other side.
So less talking, more listening. That's not exactly my usual style,
Okay.
but I can see how that would create a more collaborative environment.
Think of it like a detective game. You're not just trying to close a deal. You're trying to figure out what's driving their decisions, their motivations, their constraints, their hidden needs.
Okay, so how do we unlock those insights? Asking the right questions.
Exactly. And Malhotra gives us this really simple but powerful framework. Why is more important than what?
Oh man, I struggle with that. I always focus on the what. what they want, what I'm willing to give. How do we get to the why without sounding like we're grilling them?
It's all about framing your questions the right way to show real interest. Instead of just asking, why do you need a lower price, you could say, hey, what kind of budget pressures are you dealing with right now? Or what are your top priorities for this deal?
I see. I see. It's about showing empathy and understanding.
Exactly. And once you understand their why, you can start brainstorming creative solutions that address their actual needs, not just their demands.
This is making me realize how often I've gone into negotiations with a fixed mindset, Like, this is what I need to get, period. But this approach opens up so many more possibilities.
Yeah, it's like the difference between following a recipe and coming up with a whole new dish.
Okay, so we're prepped with a learning mindset and armed with some insightful questions, but let's be real, we need to be ready for the curveballs too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Malhotra actually has a pretty funny way of putting it. Be ready for the punch in the face.
Huh. That classic Mike Tyson quote, right? Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face.
Exactly. And in a negotiation, that punch could be a tough question. An unexpected objection, or even just some new information that changes everything.
Yeah, those are the moments when we're most likely to panic and make concessions we regret later.
Which is why it's so crucial to anticipate those punches.
Yeah.
And prepare your responses ahead of time. What are the toughest questions they could throw at you? What are your absolute non-negotiables? And how can you frame your responses so you stay calm, confident, and in control?
It's like hope for the best, but prepare for the worst.
Exactly. By thinking through those worst-case scenarios, you go in with a sense of confidence. That helps you stay grounded even when things get heated.
All right, so we've got our strategy, our BATNA analysis, a learning mindset, and a plan for those metaphorical punches. Now let's talk about making the offer.
Okay, so here's where Malhotra challenges another piece of conventional wisdom. You know that whole thing about letting the other side make the
Right.
first offer?
Yeah, I've always heard that's the best strategy. Why does he recommend flipping the script?
He argues that making the first offer gives you a huge advantage. You get to set the initial reference point. You shape expectations right from the start.
So even if they don't accept your first offer, it still influences the direction of the conversation.
Exactly. It sets the framework, it sets the tone. But he also stresses that your first offer shouldn't just be a random number. It needs a story.
So it's not just what you're offering, it's why that offer makes sense.
Right. Numbers alone are easy to dismiss. But when you give them a narrative, a justification, a breakdown of your reasoning, it's much harder to ignore.
I love that tell the story behind the offer. It makes the whole thing feel less transactional and more collaborative.
Yeah, that's key to building trust and rapport.
Mm.
Now, of course, as the negotiation goes on, there will be times when you need to make concessions.
Mm.
And this is where Malhotra introduces this really interesting concept, managing attributions.
Managing attributions. I'm not familiar with that term.
It's basically about being really aware of how your actions are perceived by the other side. The same concession can be interpreted in totally different ways, depending on the context and how you present it.
So like a price reduction could be seen as flexibility or it could be seen as weakness.
Exactly. That's where labeling comes in. Instead of just offering a concession, you actively shape how it's perceived.
So instead of just saying, okay, we can lower the price, it's more like we're willing to adjust the price to reflect the current market. But we also need to make sure we can still deliver a top quality product.
Perfect example. You're not just giving something away, you're making a strategic move and explaining the thinking behind it. It shows you're thoughtful, you're in control. You're not just caving to pressure.
Wow. I've never thought about concessions that way before.
It's a whole new level of strategy. And that brings us to another common trap that Malhotra warns about, mindless haggling.
Oh man, I'm so guilty of that. Getting fixated on one issue like price and losing sight of the bigger picture.
It's easy to get sucked into that back and forth, but it rarely leads to a good outcome. Malhotra encourages us to think in terms of packages, not individual items.
So instead of just negotiating price, we should be looking at other elements of the deal, where there might be more wiggle room, maybe the timeline, the scope of work, or offering additional services.
Exactly. By broadening the scope of the negotiation, you create more opportunities for creative trades and those win-win solutions.
And when it comes to presenting those solutions, Malhotra has a somewhat unusual approach, right?
He does. Instead of presenting just one offer, he suggests giving them multiple options at the same time.
That's interesting. Why does he recommend that?
Well, first of all, it shows you're flexible. It tells them you're not locked into one position and you're open to exploring different possibilities. Second, it gives you insight into their priorities. By seeing which offer they're most drawn to, learn what's most important to them. And finally, it increases the chances of finding a solution that really works for both sides.
Like giving them a menu instead of just one dish.
Exactly. And to really emphasize that spirit of collaboration, Malhotra often uses this phrase that I think perfectly sums up his approach. I know where I need to get it. I'm flexible on how we get there.
I love that. It's confident but not aggressive.
Right. It shows you're willing to be creative and find solutions that benefit everyone.
So it's not a zero-sum game.
Exactly.
Okay, so what about those tricky moments? When the other side throws you a curveball, like an offer that seems totally unreasonable?
Malhotra stresses the importance of managing your initial reaction. Even a split second of hesitation or frustration can be seen as weakness.
So we need to be aware of our body language, our tone of voice, everything.
Exactly. Stay calm, composed, and show them you're taking the process seriously, even when they throw a curveball.
What if the curveball is due to real constraints on their end, though? How do we know if it's genuine or just a tactic?
That's where empathy is so important.
Mhm.
Before you label them as difficult or irrational, try to see things from their perspective. Maybe they have budget limitations or internal pressures you don't know about.
Yeah. It's easy to get caught up in our own needs and forget that they have their own challenges.
Right. And sometimes what seems irrational is just a lack of information. Maybe they haven't fully grasped your perspective or there's a key piece of info missing.
So it's about asking clarifying questions, listening actively, and trying to walk in their shoes.
Exactly. And if you do hit a roadblock, Malhotra offers this brilliant piece of advice. Write their victory speech.
Write their victory speech. How does that help?
It's about understanding how they'll present the outcome to their stakeholders. How can you help them save face? How can you structure the deal so they can declare victory?
I get it. You're creating a narrative that lets them feel good about the agreement.
Exactly. And when you can do that, you're much more likely to find a solution that benefits everyone.
Now, what about ultimatums? Those are pretty common in negotiations.
Malhotra is actually a big fan of ignoring them, especially early on in the negotiation. Why give them power?
Okay, but what if you can't just ignore it? What if it's a real ultimatum and they're ready to walk?
In those cases, he suggests reframing it as a non-ultimatum. So if they say take it or leave it, you could say something like, I understand that's your position right now, but I'm confident we can find a solution that works for both of us.
Okay, so you're taking the wind out of their sails without being confrontational.
Exactly. And if you absolutely have to use an ultimatum yourself, he has two main criteria. It has to be real, meaning you're actually prepared to follow through. And it should only be a last resort when you've exhausted all other options.
It's about protecting your credibility.
Yeah.
If you're always making empty threats, no one will take you seriously.
Right. And at some point, your credibility might be the only leverage you have left.
That's a good point. It makes you realize how important it is to be honest and follow through on your commitments.
Because ultimately, people want to work with people they can trust.
Absolutely. So what happens if, despite our best efforts, the negotiation falls apart? Any advice for those situations?
Malhotra says you should never leave a negotiation without understanding why it failed. Don't just walk away. Push for an explanation. Ask them, what would it have taken for you to say yes?
So turn a no into a learning opportunity.
Exactly. Maybe you'll discover some crucial information that could lead to a deal in the future. Or maybe you'll realize the deal was never going to work no matter what. Either way, you've gained valuable insights.
And finally, Malhotra emphasizes sending a follow-up email, whether the negotiation was successful or not.
Yep.
I'll admit, I don't always do that. I'm usually so glad it's over, I just want to move on. But what's the value in sending that follow-up?
It lets you confirm agreements, clarify expectations, and gather any additional info. It's also a chance to reframe the conversation if you need to, and to thank them for their time.
So it's not just about wrapping things up, it's about strengthening the relationship.
Exactly. And Malhotra ends with a really powerful message about the importance of honesty in negotiations.
I love that he talks about ethics. It's so refreshing to hear a business professor emphasizing honesty and integrity.
He argues that we can all afford to be more ethical, especially in business. And he makes a strong case that honesty isn't just the right thing to do. It's essential for long-term success.
He says that in the long run, your credibility is your most valuable asset.
And you lose credibility gradually through small acts of dishonesty or inconsistency.
Wow, that's a powerful message.
It is. It's about building and protecting your reputation.
He really packed a lot into this one interview.
He did. And he leaves us with a great question to think about. What's one tweak you'll try in your next negotiation?
That's such a good question to end on. I know I'm already thinking about my own style, And which of these I can start using right away?
I think that's what makes Malhotra's approach so powerful. It's not just about these huge business deals. These principles apply to pretty much any situation where you're trying to reach an agreement with someone.
Yeah, you're right. Think about it, everyday stuff. Negotiating with your family about vacation plans, dealing with conflicts at work, even just deciding where to go for dinner with friends.
Exactly. These little tweaks can help you navigate those situations with more confidence and clarity, and maybe even make it a little more fun.
I like how he takes the mystery out of negotiating and makes it feel accessible to anyone. It's not about being a hard-nosed, take-no-prisoners kind of person. It's about being strategic and empathetic and prepared.
Right. It's all about human interaction at the end of the day. It's about understanding what motivates people and finding common ground and building those relationships.
And sometimes that means walking away from a deal if it's just not the right fit. But even then, you can still learn from it and come away with a better sense of your own values and priorities.
For sure. And he really pushes us to be more ethical, more truthful, and to think about the impact we have on others.
This has been such a great deep dive. I feel like I have a whole new perspective on negotiation.
Me too.
Mm.
His advice is so practical, but also really profound. It's about getting better outcomes.
Yeah.
But it's also about becoming better negotiators, better
Yeah.
communicators, better people.
So to all our listeners out there, what's one tweak you're going to try in your next negotiation? Let us know. And if you want more from Professor Malhotra, we highly recommend checking out his books and articles. He's a true master of negotiation and deal-making.
And just building those strong, lasting relationships.
Until next time, happy negotiating.